Quick announcement, guys. I'm going to be doing a Getter Q&A live for about a half hour this evening. It's at 7:30 Eastern. I hope you're all on Getter. It's an awesome platform. And, we need all these good platforms, including, of course, the Trump platform. So check out my Q&A tonight, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Getter. Now, today, Steve Mosher, the China expert, will be joining me. We're going to talk about the two big bullies of Asia, Xi and Putin. There's an article about the existential sadness of young Democrats. I'll tell you, I'm actually taking great satisfaction in this article. I'll reveal how Biden is trying to fulfill Obama's Gitmo dream. The Whitmer kidnapping trial is underway, and there's a very interesting development. I'll tell you about that. And I'll discuss the elegant, elegiac figure of Pierre de la Vigne in Canto 13 of Dante's Inferno. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Do Democrats love America? Would Democrats rise to the defense of their own country? These questions can be answered by looking at a fascinating new poll, a survey by Quinnipiac University. And the question that was asked of Americans, not just Democrats, everybody, was how would you react if, in a sense, America was in the position of Ukraine? In other words, we're not talking about American adventures abroad. The poll is not asking about should the United States get involved over there, anywhere. Rather, it's asking that if some foreign power invaded the actual territory of the United States, what would you do? Would you defend America? Or would you stay and fight, in other words, or would you leave the country? So that's the question. And the answers are kind of eye-opening. Turns out that most Americans would stay and fight, but most Democrats would not. Democrats are sort of the exception. They say they would actually rather leave. So 68% of Republicans said stay and fight, 57% of independents stay and fight, but only 40% of Democrats said they would take up arms to defend the country. The others said, we're out of here. Now, you might think that this is not really about the Democrats. Well, maybe this is something that's kind of like, it's really the significant factor, let's say, is race. But no, it turns out that 61% of Hispanics said they would stay and fight. And actually, that was the highest of any racial group, even higher than whites. Among blacks, 38% said stay and fight, which is basically the same as the Democrats, 40%. Some of the difference, of course, and this is very understandable, is by gender, is by sex. Men are obviously more likely to stay and fight than are women. But even women, 40% of them say, we'll stay and fight. That's about the same percentage as the Democrats. So are we dealing here with Democrats who are just basically effeminate, have kind of lost their will to fight, have lost their manliness, you might say, as a party? Well, I think the explanation runs a little bit deeper. And that is that Democrats have come to embrace a whole set of propositions that have made fleeing cowardice, a sense of entitlement. We want the country owes us things, but we don't owe the country anything. What's cultivated this in Democrats? Well, we're not just talking here ultimately about, the indoctrination in the schools that says the United States is a force for evil in the world, or that, hey, half the country supports Donald Trump and he's a fascist. What does that say about America? It's true. Democrats, particularly young Democrats, get peppered with this kind of stuff. But I think you have to add in some other factors. Above and beyond the claims that America is an imperialist and a racist and a white supremacist nation, you have to add in the whole climate issue. The idea that, hey, this is not just about about the misfortunes of America. The planet itself is kind of on a downhill course. We're headed for extinction. And so survivalism, the sort of desire to sort of just hang in there a little bit longer, becomes a sort of almost becomes a mentality that comes out of that. We see this in other types of data that don't have to do with staying and fighting. Democrats, for example, say things like, we're not really planning to have children. We're seeing a drop in the desire to have children among liberals and among Democrats. And that's, I think, part of the same kind of sentiment that America is not good and the planet is not in good shape and human beings aren't all that good. There's an article in the Washington Examiner that I think sums this up pretty well. They call it the existential sadness of Democrats. And I sort of don't know how to feel about it because, on the one hand, I'm very contemptuous. These are spoiled, decadent, ungrateful people. These are the Frankenstein monsters of entitlement that our culture has created. And part of me says, should we try to rehabilitate them? But how? We don't control the academic institutions. We don't control the education system or the media. So any rehabilitation project is going to be, I think, a little bit utopian. So the other option, of course, is to do nothing, to just sort of watch this decadence and watch it with a certain amount of avoidance. We hope that we don't become like them. Let's try to prevent our kids from becoming the same kind of degenerates that they are. Or the third option, which actually a little part of me likes, is let's work to demoralize them further. If the Democrats are experiencing existential sadness, how can we drive them even crazier than they are now? How do we sap their morale further? How do we feed their paranoia? How do we deepen their miseries? In other words, how do we turn this whole thing into a kind of entertainment project in which their grief is our joy? Yes, I'm making the case for that old word, schadenfreude, which is taking pleasure in other people's misery. It's not entirely a nice thing to do, but sometimes it's kind of an enjoyable thing to do. Every morning when I roll out of bed, and these days it's a little bit early because I'm working on my book that goes alongside the movie, but I kind of get into my MyPillow My Slippers, and they're super comfortable, so it's fun for me to talk about them. Mike has taken over 2 years to develop these My Slippers. They're designed to wear indoor or outdoor all day long, made with MyPillow foam and impact gel to help prevent fatigue, made with quality leather suede, and for a limited time, Mike Lindell is offering 50% off the My Slippers. The My Slippers are so comfortable, you're going to want to get some for the whole family, and we actually did. Here's Danielle with her moccasins. Of course, Debbie and I just love ours. I got the moccasins, Debbie got the slip-ons. Go to MyPillow.com and use promo code Dinesh. You get deep discounts on all the MyPillow products, the Giza Dream bed sheets, the MyPillow mattress topper, the MyPillow towel sets, and so on. Call 800-876-0227. That's 800-876-0227, or go to MyPillow.com. Make sure to use promo code DINESH Dinesh. Guys, I'm really happy to welcome back to the podcast Steve Mosher. He's the president of the Population Research Institute, a leading authority on China. His latest book is called Bully of Asia. Steve, thanks for joining me. I was delighted to have you on the podcast a little while ago, but here we are with the Ukraine conflict raging. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at what's happening in Ukraine, but try to do it from the eyes of China. China, of course, is one of the major players in the world, along with Russia. And you have an article in the New York Post in which you say the Chinese, although they're making noises to the effect that they're a little distressed about all this and they're hoping for a negotiated settlement, that's not really their real view. So talk about that.
Well, no, it isn't, of course. China, I think, helped to encourage Putin to invade Ukraine, and they did it for multiple reasons. And they did it in multiple ways. The first way they did it, is by signing 15 different agreements between China and Russia for the purchase of Russian-made goods, commodities, and oil and gas, critically oil and gas. China will be purchasing a lot of Russian oil and gas from now on. They're now going to be purchasing a lot of wheat. In other words, the very products that we may be sanctioning and are sanctioning are now being purchased by the People's Republic of China. In other words, economically, the Russians can look to China as a market for their goods, so they don't need to worry as much about Western sanctions. And these agreements, including a 5,000-word statement talking about the friendship between Russia and China and how they're going to cooperate strategically. Those things didn't get done overnight. This was months and months and months in the making. And I found something very interesting in my research. 4 months ago, China and Russia signed a new shipping agreement so that China would be buying the grain and the oil and natural gas at the Russian ports. Normally, you ship the goods, and then when they arrive in Chinese ports, China buys them. The shipper, the producer, is responsible for getting the goods safely from the first country one to country two. Now China's reversed it. Why? Because they were anticipating an embargo. They were anticipating sanctions, and they said, we'll buy your oil, Vladimir Putin, at the port so that the United States and NATO will not be able to intercept it and confiscate it. That happened 4 months ago. So this has been a long, long time in the making. And I don't think that Putin would have gone into Ukraine unless he knew he had a backdoor market for his product. So this is one way that China has been encouraging the invasion of Ukraine. But make no mistake, they're the big winners here, because the other thing they get is they get kind of a test run to see how the West reacts when a country is invaded by another country, because it has designs on Taiwan. It wants to invade Taiwan, and it can gauge from the Western response to the Russian incursion into Ukraine how the West would respond in an invasion of Taiwan. And now we have Vladimir Putin as kind of a supplicant to China. China is 10 times larger in population, has an economy 10 times larger. And I think if Vladimir Putin isn't careful, he'll wind up as a vassal of Xi Jinping. Russia will wind up as a tributary state of China. And you know, it's a bad idea to be too beholden to a country that looks back at history and says, you know, you're sitting, Russia, on several 100,000 square miles of our territory, and we want it back.
I guess kind of what you're saying is that here's Russia, which is a half Asian power and a half European power. It's sort of straddling the two continents, if you will. And China, which is becoming the supreme power in Asia, is looking to maybe corral Russia into its orbit as to strengthen its own hand against the West. I think you're also saying, and I think this is fascinating, that Putin on his chessboard kind of anticipated, look, if I do this in the Ukraine, there's going to be sanctions. I need to hedge against those sanctions, so let me make a trip to China beforehand to sort of blunt the effect of future sanctions that may be imposed on me by the West. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I don't think that Vladimir Putin is losing his mind. I think that this was all carefully calculated and worked out with the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party well in advance of the incursion. And as far as I know, the only request that China made, because they saw this as a win-win for them all the way down the line, it would weaken the United States, distract the United States from Asia, get our NATO allies engaged in conflict in Europe, and all the world's attention would be deflected away from Taiwan and China's aggressive acts towards that island and maybe other places. So they immediately signed on. They immediately decided to help Vladimir Putin. Their only request was, please don't invade until after the Winter Olympics are over. Let us complete our spectacle before you begin your invasion. And Vladimir Putin said, yes.
Wow. Let's take a pause. When we come back, I want to explore how the West has been reacting so far toward the Ukraine, what kind of message that is sending to China. I want to tell you about one of my favorite new podcasts on the Salem Podcast Network, The Situation Report. You're going to want to check out the show and subscribe. So many people out there are living in a state of depression, hearing about what's happening to our culture on the news, not knowing what to do with the information they consume. The Situation Report tackles all of the critical issues facing our culture today, but unlike the news, they give you the direction you need to navigate, take action, and move forward. They provide you with the tools you need to share information and engage people in meaningful conversation. Change hearts by changing minds. The Situation Report has new episodes 3 times a week on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, available on all of the major podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Or you can listen over at thesitrep.org. That's the sitrep.org. I'm back with Steve Mosher, president of the Population Research Institute, expert on China, author of Bully of Asia. Steve, we were talking about the Chinese who are carefully monitoring the West's response to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. In part, the Chinese are looking to see what's the resolve of the West. In part, they're looking to what if they do their own action against Taiwan? How is the West likely to respond in that case? Let's start by comparing Ukraine and Taiwan. Does the West view those two places differently? Is it the case that we have more vital interest, for example, in Taiwan than we do in Ukraine?
Well, I think we absolutely do, because the majority of the world's chip manufacturing facilities are located in Taiwan. Taiwan is a part of the strategic choke point that keeps the People's Liberation Army Navy bottled up in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. And losing Taiwan would give the People's Liberation Army Navy open access to the Pacific Ocean. Next stop, Hawaii, the west coast of the United States. So if you look at the map, you've got the first island chain, South Korea, Japan, down to through Taiwan and the Philippines, down to Indonesia. And again, Taiwan is the linchpin of that. It is, we used to call it, back in the 1950s, an unsinkable aircraft carrier when we had the 8th Air Force stationed in Taichung, which is a city in central Taiwan. We've got to think about being proactive. We've got to think about arming Taiwan before an incursion. You know, once the forces are moving across the Taiwan Straits, it's too late to think about sending anti-ship missiles. The anti-ship missiles need to be there now. And then think about the larger strategic question. Vladimir Putin wants to reassemble the Russian Empire piece by bloody piece. Okay, fine. China's schemes are much more grandiose. Xi Jinping wants to dominate the entire world. He wants to be like the Chinese emperors of old. He wants to dominate all of Tianxia, which is all under heaven. That means his appetites won't be sated by just taking Taiwan. He has irredentist claims in all points of the compass, north into Siberia, the Russian Far East, they believe, was stolen from the Qing dynasty. He has designs on Central Asia, on parts of India. In Vietnam, back in the 9th century, was part of China, and anything that China once governed, they lay a historical claim to. So his ambitions, Xi Jinping's ambitions, are global, which, if you think about it, is much more of a threat to the current world order than Russia's will ever be.
I'm assuming that Xi Jinping is seeing in Biden a vacillating figure who had sort of authorized the Nord Stream 2, then reactively says, okay, we're going to stop buying the Russian oil. We're going to start buying it now from Venezuela and from Iran. So this is a pathetic performance by Biden. Talk about that first, and then I want to ask you about the measures taken against the Russian oligarchs.
Well, we all know, Dinesh, about the statement that Barack Obama correctly made about Joe Biden. That is, everything Joe touches turns to a pile of steaming horse manure. I'm paraphrasing there. And he was perfectly correct. I mean, I've known Joe Biden since the 1990s when we set up Radio Free Asia, and went to see him because he was on the relevant committee, the Foreign Relations Committee. He was not a serious person then. He's not a serious person now. Even less serious, of course, because he has trouble concentrating. So with a little wisdom and foresight, the whole Ukrainian situation could have been avoided. With foresight and strengthening the defenses of Taiwan, we won't need to come to the defense of Taiwan because it will be able to defend itself. 77% of the people on Taiwan say they would take up arms to defend their democratic island that respects human rights, is a fully functioning democracy, if a Chinese invasion occurred. So let's help them, equip them with the weapons they need to defend themselves. And I think an invasion won't happen, at least in the near future.
I mean, part of what we've been seeing, and this has been, I suppose, a kind of moral lesson, is the bravery of the Ukrainians in resisting. They haven't buckled in perhaps the way that Putin had expected. What you're saying is that the Taiwanese are patriotic and will fight for their own country, and there's no reason that America shouldn't, I'm assuming you're saying, not necessarily provide troops, but rather provide the materiel that will give Taiwan the ability to effectively resist, correct?
Right, absolutely. No boots on the ground. Um, they can defend themselves. Taiwan is a first world country with a dynamic economy, able to afford modern weapon systems, able to be trained in their use. And I mean, for example, Dinesh, we have committed to send 100 Harpoon anti-ship missiles to Taiwan. Vitally important so that any invading fleet might find its ships sunk to the bottom of the Taiwan Straits. Anti-ship missiles would protect an island because it has an 80-mile, 90-mile wide moat between the mainland and its beaches. So that's a dangerous transit. And we need to make it more dangerous for the Navy of the Chinese Communist Party. But those Harpoon missiles are not due to arrive until 2025. Why the 3-year delay? Why not do it now? We've got the missiles in storage and get them set up now. This is simple, right? Peace through strength. We all know the phrase, but apparently the Biden administration has trouble acting on it. They actually withheld weapons from Ukraine for reasons that I will never understand, and left Ukraine more defenseless than it should have been.
One of the strategies you do recommend in your article is the idea of going after these oligarchs. You point out that taking away their international privileges, preventing their kids from going into sort of top Western universities. The Chinese, you say, have more oligarchs than the Russians. And so since in the end of the day, Marxist-Leninist ideology aside, it is about living well and exercising the perquisites of power. You're saying that's something that could cause China to think twice about Taiwan.
Well, I mean, you and I both know that communism as an ideology is a fantasy. It is just an excuse for seizing and holding power forever by a small clique of individuals. In the case of Vladimir Putin, I've met a couple of his close associates. They own yachts, they own resorts in places like Rhodes, Greece. They own lots of property, maybe a townhome overlooking Central Park in New York City. And you can multiply that by 10 to get the number of the Chinese oligarchs, the people who sit on the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, sit on the Politburo, who run the provinces. And make no mistake, they have, by corrupt machinations, accumulated fabulous amounts of wealth. For example, Wen Jiabao, Premier Wen, who was a premier from 2002 to 2012 when he stepped down, has a net worth of $2.3 billion as of the time that he left office. $2.3 billion on an official salary of about $5,000 a month. He's obviously either the most astute investor the world has ever seen, or he's engaged in graft, and of course it's the latter. Walked away with a couple $2 billion from the premiership by selling offices and by skimming off the hard work of the Chinese people. So these people are vulnerable because they don't trust their own systems. So they don't want to keep their wealth in Russia or China. They want to put it overseas where property rights are respected and where other foreign oligarchs won't steal it from them. So they have, I think, at least half, if not more, of their holdings in Western countries. And we can put pressure on them in the way we're putting pressure on Vladimir Putin right now, seizing yachts and other property that the oligarchs own overseas. And I think we've already seen some movement on that. I think we had one Russian oligarch say maybe he's going to put $1 million bounty on Vladimir Putin's head. Another one said, I'm going to sell my Chelsea soccer team and use the proceeds to do humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, not Russia, Ukraine. So you can peel away the support that a supreme leader like Xi Jinping needs by telling his associates, you're not going to get away with an attempted invasion of Taiwan cost-free. It will cost you part of your family fortune.
Fascinating. Hey, Steve Mosher, thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Good to talk to you.
We all know that in order to keep our immune system strong, we need extra protection for it. My friends at Centurion Labs have combined 5 key ingredients to defend your immune system against allergies, colds, the flu, even coronavirus. It's called Centurion Defender, and it incorporates vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, copper, and quercetin in just one capsule. No more swallowing 10 pills a day or not taking supplements because the individual cost is too high. Debbie and I currently take just one Defender with breakfast, one Defender later with dinner, and this definitely keeps the germaphobe in our family happy. Just like the centurions of Rome, led by example, held themselves to the highest possible standards, Centurion Labs has dedicated the last 15 years to research and develop safe, effective, and affordable healthcare products made in the USA that you can trust. For a limited time, listeners of this podcast can save 20% off their first order of Centurion Defender when you visit centurionlabs.com/Dinesh. Defend your health today with Centurion Defender. Go to centurionlabs.com/Dinesh. That's CENTURION labs.com/Dinesh. The Biden administration is emptying out the Guantanamo Bay prison Gitmo. And last month, Biden freed his first prisoner, an accused terrorist named Abdul Latif Nasser. And this is all, by the way, in fulfillment of Obama's dream. Obama's dream was, we don't want Gitmo. In fact, I kind of want all those commanders back in the field fighting against the United States. May seem like a crazy idea for an American president to think this way, but not if you're an anti-colonialist who basically thinks America is a force for evil in the world, and that strengthening our enemies is ultimately a form of social justice on the global scale. It's sort of righting the unjust ship of the world. And if it seems, again, too much to say that the United States has been actively putting its own enemies back in the field, this is actually confirmed by a recent study that looks at all the Gitmo detainees going back to Obama and even earlier who were freed to see where they are now. Well, let's take a look. 20 years after the 9/11 attacks, we see U.S. intelligence documents show that 229 former Gitmo detainees have returned to terrorism. They're basically fighting in the field somewhere in the world, mostly in Afghanistan, but also elsewhere, against America. And 66% of them are at large, meaning they haven't been recaptured. They're not in some prison in some foreign country. And you would think that all of this would create pause in freeing more Gitmo terrorists. But no, Biden has freed one, and he's on his way to freeing more. By the way, Trump had an executive order to keep Gitmo open, and Biden reversed it immediately. And remaining detainees are sort of one by one. Many of them have made petitions for release. And by the way, these petitions are transparently absurd. For example, one of the Gitmo alumni, who is now one of the heads of the Taliban, this is a guy who helped capture the presidential palace in Kabul with armed fighters. In a victory speech, he was like, I used to be in Gitmo. This was part of his boasting rights. I used to be in Gitmo. And this guy's name is Gholam Rouhani. And he said, I got out of Gitmo because I just told those idiots in America. He says, I told them I have to return to help my sick father run his family shop. And apparently the dopes in the United States go, oh yeah, his father's sick. We got to let him go. Poor guy. And now he's basically one of the inner circle of the Taliban in Kabul. If you look at other Gitmo applications, at least 5 inmates have given the same excuse. They've got to go visit their ailing mother. Not the same woman, evidently, but there are evidently 5 ailing mothers somewhere in Afghanistan or Pakistan, and the Gitmo guys they really need to go home, you know. So with the exception of just a couple of guys, people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the actual planner of 9/11, he's not scheduled for release, but Biden wants to get even him out of Gitmo. Once you shut down Gitmo, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed can't be there. And the net effect of this would be that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would now be, if you wanted to try him, you'd have to try him in a normal court. And that would create a circus. It would essentially turn a military operation into a kind of domestic law case, as if to say this guy was some sort of a serial killer walking the streets of Chicago. It would be transferred, I think, inappropriately into that kind of a case. Now, according to a report, this is by the Office of National Intelligence, 729 detainees have been released from Gitmo all over the last several years. And about 220 of them are sort of back in the field, back in the fight. Let's remember, in a sense, that the model for this was created by Obama himself with the sort of Bergdahl trade. He gave 5 Taliban commanders for 1 deserter. And what did those Taliban commanders do? Went right back into fighting in Syria, fighting in the Middle East, fighting in Afghanistan. And again, I don't think Obama, you can keep saying that the Democrats are naive, but they're producing results. These are the predictable consequences of their actions. No doubt they were told that this was going to happen. I think this is what they wanted to happen, and that in fact is why they did it. If you could see and taste the steak or salmon from moinkbox.com, you would order it right now. I'm seeing it kind of and tasting it in my head, and it's delicious. I'm telling you, you got to get moinkbox.com. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and wild-caught Alaskan salmon direct to your door, in the process helping family farms become financially independent outside of big agriculture. Moink meat is so delicious, I love it, and you will too. Get moinked right now. Join the Moink movement today. Go to moinkbox.com/Dinesh right now. Listeners to this show will get free filet mignon for a year. What? That's 1 year of the best filet mignon you'll ever taste, but for a limited time. It's spelled M-O-I-N-K, moinkbox.com/Dinesh. That's moinkbox.com/Dinesh. The trial of the ragtag defendants who supposedly plotted a kidnapping of Governor Whitmer is now underway. There's been jury selection going on. The general framework of the case has been set up. And it's going to be an interesting case, I think, because on the one hand, you've got the FBI and the prosecution trying to vindicate a kind of official leftist narrative. And what's that narrative? That you've got these right-wing kind of white supremacists, almost a prelude to January 6th, motivated by President Trump, and they were trying to do a political hit on Whitmer. And this was, of course, the narrative that Whitmer herself jumped on. She made a video right after the arrest of the perpetrators, the alleged perpetrators, and she said, when our leaders meet with, encourage, or fraternize with domestic terrorists, they legitimize their actions. Who are the leaders? She's actually referring here to Trump. They are complicit. Now, Whitmer knew at the time that there was a lot more to this story, and this is really going to be the heart of the defense. And there was some question about whether the judge in the this Whitmer trial would permit the defense. And the defense is this. The FBI set it up. The FBI entrapped these defendants. The FBI actually concocted this whole case. They set up the mechanisms for doing it. They made sure that the plot was moved forward at every stage. And then finally they turned around and busted the perpetrators that they had put up to it in the first place. So this is going to be the heart of the defense. How the government agents, quote, actively planned and coordinated its efforts to induce the defendants to engage in incriminating behavior and statements, even going so far as designing the objective and structural components of the conspiracy alleged in the indictment. Now, the FBI has been very embarrassed by this case because they've actually pulled a number of their own agents who were part of this plot, who were instigators, if you will, and cooperators and enablers. They've pulled them off the trial. They said, no, we're not going to call these guys to testify. They're not going to be part of the prosecution's case. Now, the defense does have the right to call them, so we'll see what happens there. But a lot of what happened in the Whitmer case, first of all, there were at least 12 FBI agents and informants and undercover participants in this plot. So pretty much one agent, if not more, for each defendant. More government agents, if you will, than actual, you may say, ragtag perpetrators. And all of this was coordinated through an FBI informant, in fact, a convicted felon named Dan. And this Dan character was the guy who brought all the pieces together. In fact, he was the one who really made the plot go forward. Before this, you had these ragtag guys, and all they were doing is boasting online, oh, we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, but nothing was actually happening. No plot was actually being carried out. It became really clear they didn't even have the means to carry out any kind of a plot. So what does Dan do? In conjunction with the FBI, he creates a national militia conference in Ohio. Ohio in June 2020. And that was the meeting at which supposedly this plot was organized. But it wasn't organized by the defendants. It was organized by another guy named Stephen Robeson, a supposed militia leader from Wisconsin. This guy's also an FBI informant. So Dan calls the meeting, another FBI informant organizes the plot, and then other agents are facilitating, providing training, providing resources, and so on. So every aspect of the case, I'm now quoting from a defense document, every meeting, every field training exercise, every significant event from the day the investigation commenced until the defendant's arrest, orchestrated by the FBI. At least this is the contention of the defense. Now, the FBI, I think knowing of its own extensive involvement, is trying to conceal from the jury the identities of two of its FBI agents who are the FBI calls them Mark and Red. And the FBI says, oh, these guys they're involved in some important current cases. No, they have nothing to do with this case per se, but we can't let their identities be known. Well, the judge, a guy named Robert Jonker, the district court judge, he goes, nah, the defense has every right to hear from not just to hear from these guys, but to know who they are, to know their identities. And so we're not going to go with this kind of government orchestrated disguise. And so you got FBI agents and informants, Richard Trask, Jason Chambers, Henrik Impola. They're not even going to testify. This is the FBI trying to hide the bad characters in its own stable. And so, I think all of this is a very instructive window into January 6th. We happen to know, and I learned this from Julie Kelly, that the FBI, the head of the operation in Michigan that busted this operation, if you want to call it that, was then transferred to D.C., where he's now a lead figure in the January 6th investigation. So it's almost like they were like, yeah, you know what, you kind of pulled it off in Michigan, so let's bring you over to D.C., where we've got an even bigger operation for you. So essentially, this is now the Federal Bureau of Hoaxes. This is sort of Jussie Smollett, a heavily armed Jussie Smollett operation. By the way, Debbie tells me Jussie Smollett is being sentenced today, which will be interesting to see. But I'm hoping that the defense is able to do a really good job and expose the cops in this case for being what I think they really are, thugs with badges who initiated, concocted, pushed forward, and thus are responsible for this whole operation. I've been listening to and watching testimonies from all kinds of people who have aches and pains, and they take Relief Factor, which is a 100% drug-free solution, and they go, wow, this stuff really works. Relief Factor supports your body's fight against inflammation, which is the source of aches and pains. And the vast majority of people who try it order more. Why? For the simple reason that it works for them. Debbie's a true believer. It's been a total game changer for her in fixing her so-called frozen shoulder. And Debbie knows if she doesn't take it regularly, then the pain's going to come right back. So she's like, I'm not going to be without this again. Being able to lift her arm and exercise is super important to her. Relief Factor is the tool she needs. She's glad she's got it. You too can benefit. Try it for yourself. You'll see. Order the 3-week quick start for the discounted price of only $19.95. Go to relieffactor.com or call 833-690-7246 to find out more about this offer. That number again, 833-690-7246, or go to relieffactor.com. Feel the difference. The Supreme Court is taking up the case of Harvard University's discrimination against whites and against Asian Americans. And in that context, I read an interesting observation by Kenny Zhu, who I think we've had on this podcast before. And here's Kenny making a statistical point. He says that Asian Americans on the SAT have to score 450 points higher than Black Americans, and in fact, more than 100 points higher than whites, to have exactly the same chance of being admitted to Harvard. So what Harvard has set up is almost a multi-tier racial admission system in which, in effect, Asian American applicants compete with other Asians. Whites compete against whites, blacks against blacks. And why are they doing this? To create a racially balanced outcome. In effect, if Harvard were purely meritocratic, there would be a large number of Asians, a decent number of whites, a very small number of Hispanics, and virtually no blacks, or a very small number of blacks. Now, Ibram Kendi, the critical race theory activist, hard to call him really a scholar, he makes the point, he looks at that result, the merit result, you might say, and he goes, what are you saying? Are you saying that blacks are inferior? And everyone goes, no, we're not saying that. And he goes, well, if they're not inferior, then obviously the system must be racist. So this is the kind of syllogism that the activists use. In a sense, what you have to say is that Harvard has to accept that it's systematically racist, so that blacks and others and Hispanics don't have to say we're academically behind. In other words, Harvard has to acknowledge its bigotry, so blacks don't have to admit academic backwardness. And this puts the Asian Americans in a particularly odd situation. Why? Because Asian Americans actually benefit from a merit principle. A merit principle is going to benefit most the poor guy without any connections, without family wealth, doesn't have a history, his dad didn't go there. Those are things that actually do benefit whites. If you're talking about legacy admissions, that's going to benefit whites. If you're going to talk about people with inherited family wealth, obviously in general, that's going to be more whites. But on the other hand, Asian Americans are relying on merit because if you're at the bottom of the ladder, then, and you're smart and you're willing to work hard, merit is basically your friend. And yet, and here's the paradox, there are some prominent Asian Americans who are defending affirmative action. Now, why is that? Why would Asian Americans act against their own self-interest, against their group self-interest, and speak out against merit, which is obviously beneficial to them? And I think the answer is that these Asian Americans, well, there are two answers. One answer is that a lot of Asian Americans have a desperate desire to assimilate. They want to conform. They want to be cool. They want to be accepted. And to be accepted in liberal culture. Let's remember these are people who go to liberal universities. They live in liberal precincts of the country, places like Silicon Valley and San Francisco and New York City. And so what they want is they want to become part of American culture. And that for them means liberal culture. And so some of them, having kind of succeeded already, are willing to say, well, you know what, in order for me to be cool, I'm okay in spiking the chances of some other young Asian Americans to get into these universities. After all, I already got in. I already took the benefits of my education, but I'm willing to sort of throw the ladder down from under me. I think the other factor is that you have this rather disgusting phenomenon really in every ethnic community. I would call it the professional Asian American. This is literally the kind of the Asian American equivalent, let's say, of a kind of Al Sharpton. And these are, I mean, first of all, these are the dregs. These are the dumbest guys in the Asian community. But what happens is that the liberals say, let's recruit them. Let's make them. These are sort of our Asian Obamas. Let's bring them all because after all, these are guys who will tout our party line. These are people who won't hesitate to spike the true interests of their own community. Why? Because there's some benefit in it for them. So this is the ambivalence of the Asian American community, a community that has every interest in fighting for merit and against racial preferences, but some of whose leaders, and this is like other leaders, you've got black leaders who undermine the interests of the black community. You've got union leaders who undermine the interests of the working class. And here you've got Asian Americans who are not, well, I guess you can't call them Uncle Toms, but perhaps the appropriate word is Uncle Tongs. I've been using ExpressVPN for over a year now, and it's the VPN that I trust. Here's something that blows my mind. These guys engineered their own VPN protocol. It's called Lightway to keep your data secure without sacrificing speed. And that's what I love about ExpressVPN. No trade-offs. ExpressVPN is an app that encrypts 100% of your network data and reroutes it through a secure server. Now, this is especially important when you use public Wi-Fi. Not only can the admin see everything you're doing, but hackers connected to that same network can also steal your account logins, your financial details, and more. And Lightway's core is open sourced and has been audited by third parties. Anyone can dive into the code and assess Lightway for themselves. It's 2022. You need to use a VPN every time you go online. And if you don't have one yet, visit expressvpn.com/Dinesh. You'll get 3 extra months free. That's expressvpn.com/Dinesh.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and salemnow.com.